Toby, you are confident that the lockdown is a mistake. What makes you confident about this when we're so unclear about what's really going on?
Well, I think the heart of the lockdown skeptics case isn't the likely economic damage, and I don't think there's much doubt about that. Even the Bank of England estimates that British GDP will shrink by as much as 35% in Q2 of this year. But it's not the economic damage. It isn't even that the public health cost will be greater than the public health benefit, though I also think that's likely, not certain, but likely. I think the strongest argument for skeptics is the civil rights argument, the civil liberties argument, which is that if a government is going to suspend the civil liberties of its citizens, of its entire population, both the healthy and the unhealthy, in order to save lives, which is the argument that was made, and an argument that's made in wartime, then I think it needs to meet quite a high evidential threshold in demonstrating that the suspension of those liberties will indeed save lives. The burden of proof has to fall on those who want to suspend our liberties. They have to have a persuasive argument for suspending those liberties. And they just didn't have one. The fact that there was so much uncertainty, I think by itself means that they haven't even demonstrated on the balance of probability that lives will be saved as a result of the lockdowns, let alone proved it beyond a reasonable doubt. They seem to have been panicked, at least in this country, into doing it by the modelling of Neil Ferguson and his team at Imperial College. And as Michael Levitt and others have pointed out, not only were various assumptions plugged into that model highly dubious, for instance, they estimated the infection fatality rate was 0.9%. We now, I think, know that it's a lot smaller than that, almost certainly smaller than half of that. But in addition, the code that underpinned and was powering that model, when it's been reviewed, analysed by coding experts, by computer programmers, including epidemiologists, they have found it to be incredibly poor, of a very poor quality. And even Professor Ferguson himself said that it was code that it was a model that he had created more than 13 years ago to model the likely course of flu pandemics. So to suspend our liberties on the basis of what we now, I think, are confident was an extremely poor model, it really wasn't justified. And the burden of proof, I think, rests with states if they are going to suspend the liberties for an indefinite period of time for entire populations. We're not even allowed to demonstrate in this country. Demonstrations of more than 100 people are currently against the law. The police are fining people for leaving their homes if they don't have a reasonable excuse. We haven't seen anything as bad as this, even during wartime. I mean, to listen to Lord Sumption, Jonathan Sumption, make the argument, I find it extremely persuasive. Our liberties have been suspended on an unprecedented scale. And let's not forget, this has never been attempted as a means of trying to mitigate the impact of a pandemic before. And even the WHO last year, when analysing how we should respond to another bad influenza outbreak, didn't recommend the quarantining of whole populations, certainly not healthy people in those populations. It's never been tried before. There's no evidence it works. States were across the world completely unjustified in suspending our liberties based on a few weak computer models.